Can we hear the Zoom people and their voices? Can we hear their presenting? Because this is mostly. Hello. So could somebody who's presenting in this panel virtually share their screen and just kind of play your audio just to verify that part at least is working?
Well, I am the first one to present, and I don't have any particular audio. So
wonderful.
So
we'll just get started with Lourdes, and we'll improvise, Jan. Oh no, Lourdes just tested her vocal channel. So it won't work for you either, Jan. We both have Macs. Okay, we'll do that. I think we should keep the order, Jan, because that doesn't make sense. Okay. All right, so it seems we're going to get started very soon. Give us one more minute. And in this time, you can think about rainbows. I think about cats. That's where my mind goes in these moments. Six-toed cats specifically. There was a six-toed cat I knew when I was really small called a muckluck. Tried to suffocate me once. My aunt had to pick the cat up while I was sleeping. I almost died, frankly. This is a trauma story, actually. I don't know why my mind went there. But that's where we're here together collectively. Are we ready? We're ready to go? Okay.
I'd like to welcome everybody here to this panel on exploring cooperative action and honoring the work of Charles Goodwin. Our first presenter is Lourdes de León from Centro de Investigación y Estudios Superiores en Antropología Social in Mexico. And her talk title is Learning by Inhabiting Actions, Mayan Siblings Cooperative Actions in Emerging Learning Ecologies. Thank you, Lourdes.
Sorry, I need to have the screen sharing. Apparently, it's not functioning. It's not on for all presenters. Did you hear me? Can you activate? Okay.
It should be working now, Lourdes.
Yeah.
But it looks.
Thank you. Are you looking at my screen?
Yes, but it's not in the play mode yet.
All right. Is it looking now in a play mode?
Other way around.
Other way around. Oh, I see it. Everything looks good.
Yeah, great. Okay. Well, thank you for inviting me to this wonderful panel. I'm very happy to be here in Mexico and be with all of you from the distance. Norma has said the title of my talk, which is Learning by Inhabiting Action. Mayan children's cooperative actions in emerging learning ecologies. Well, I start by reading a quote of Goodwin. Human action is intrinsically cooperative in character as each party builds upon structure provided by others. With these words, Charles Goodwin succinctly stated his case that human sociality is established and sustained by human action. He further stated, this cumulative process is created and lodged endogenously within particular communities. Accordingly, children's learning is shaped significantly through engaging in cooperative actions, which they gradually inhabit in becoming competent members of their communities. In this paper, I show how Mayan children emerge as cooperative actors in the process of inhabiting actions that lead them to learn skills and competences relevant to their particular community. I argue that one central aspect of children's knowledge and learning is largely shaped by taking initiative in a field of practice to engage in cooperative actions on structures provided by others. In fact, following Goodwin, I agree that children operate, use, reuse, or transform structures or substrates from their predecessors through self-discovery and hands-on experience as they engage in cooperative action. Learning thus takes place in everyday life, in good part through direct experience, that is, by observing, practicing, and enacting relevant actions in collaboration with other agents. In this context, I agree with Ingold in that the forms human build, whether in the imagination or on the ground, arise within the currents of their involved activity in the specific relational context of their practical engagement with their surroundings. So today I will be addressing these three questions. How do Mayan children cooperative actions emerge in the moment-to-moment interactions in goal-oriented activities? How do siblings apprentice and learn from each other in building or inhabiting the actions of competent actors of their communities? And how do children enact learning ecologies through cooperation in their everyday life? To this end, I explore the interactional genesis of Mayan children's cooperative actions that demonstrate forms of involvement within evolving structures of action in learning processes. In particular, I analyze how a young 3-year-old Mayan Tzotzil boy, whose name is Lol, another name, learns to use a thumb line through his hands-on experience and subsequent cooperative guidance from his sibling, Tande, 8 years old. Okay, well, first of all, what is a thumb line? Okay, this is a strap attached at both ends to a backpack or other luggage and used to carry an object by placing the strap high on the forehead, thereby alleviating pressure on the carrier's shoulders and hips. Indigenous peoples of Mesoamerica have used the thumb line for thousands of years to transport heavy loads, up to 50 to 60 pounds, across uneven terrain in journeys of up to 15 miles. The Nakantech theories of socialization consider that learning to use a thumb line is a landmark in the child's development, a skill that is normally acquired around 5 to 6 years old. The use of this contraption requires finely tuned proprioceptive skills that enables walking long distances with a heavy load on the back. The microgenesis of this skill is not clearly visible to the observer, since it involves the child's proprioceptive and kinesthetic self-calibration, as well as the support of competent actors. Within the unfolding of adult activities, young children explore and experiment with the thumb line, and as they get older, they're guided through the fine-tuning of the proprioceptive skill needed. So here I'm showing you a global view of the event that we're going to be looking at today. This is first framed, as you can see on the left side, by a larger context in which we see this little boy who's Lol, who has been keenly attending and participating in events where the thumb line is being used. Here he's looking at his mother attaching the thumb line to his eldest sister. Then we look at the micro context of Lourdes' exploration and different phases of use of this thumb line, which we'll be examining today. In the first one, you can see that his hands-on experience and a pre-operation on the substrate, which is really the thumb line with the object to be carried on. Then we see how he enacts an ecology in which his sibling cooperates with him in this goal-oriented activity. Then we see in phase 3, Lo practicing these subsequent operations on the thumb line with some frustration and failures, an unforeseeable future. And at the end, we see him enacting this learning ecology through this action. Oh, well, what is a learning ecology? Well, these are emergent, temporally unfolding, and accountably ordered phenomena. And they constitute an ecosystem of mutual influence among participants involving the mutual elaboration of semiotic resources, including multimodal communication, embodied action, objects, tools, techniques, and other relevant materials. And I'm based on different definitions of different people, especially on Chuck Goodwin and his different publications. I'll be analyzing the event in 4 phases. The first one is Lo's hands-on experience and pre-operation on the substrate, the thumb line. Then we see here the sibling cooperation and transformation of this substrate. And then we see how Lo reuses the substrate, fails, and frustrates himself. And then the final outcome when he learns the skill by fully inhabiting the relevant action. So I'm going to be showing a video, hoping it is clear enough. It's an old film. And sorry. All right. So here he is in the flower field, trying to lift the jug, a water jug. There seems to be some problem with the. Are you seeing the video? Okay. Okay. He was first exploring it. His sister comes. Sorry, don't pay attention to the sound. It's a background conversation. Actually, maybe I should. Yeah. He explores the jug and he's waiting for his sister to come and help him to place it. She takes the strap, puts it on his forehead. He stood really firmly and starts stumbling a little bit, but he's now able to carry the weight, maybe a little bit too much for him, which is over 2 liters of water. He drops it down and then his sister comes back again and helps him again to place the strap on the forehead. In the next scene, he is trying to hold the thumb line by himself, pulling it from backwards, getting very frustrated, and using his hands to lift the ropes from behind his body, which is not the way to do it. Finally, he stretches the strap and puts it in a right form to and sits down, placing it on his forehead as a competent actor would do, placing it and then propelling himself forward with his knees and walking a little bit uneven, but achieving some balance and proprioceptive skill here, very close to what a competent actor would do it. He's proudly walking and saying, I was able to lift it by myself. I was able to lift it by myself, but nobody pays attention to him. Okay, so let's look at phase 1, hands-on experience. Here we see Lo exploring the water jug with the rope. He's feeling the weight, and he is discerning, the relation of the object with the thumb line and exploring the whole thing in order to carry it. His sister is working, trimming off dry leaves from flowers, but paying attention to him. You can see the sketch of the scenes here, which are more clear. And then we'll see how in phase 2, how he's enacting this learning ecology in which his sibling is cooperating and transforming the substrate. Here we see how this mutual calibration and weight, balance, and final locomotion in order for him to be able to use the thumb line. Look at the way he firmly stands and he crosses his arms in order to be balanced and not touch the rope so that she can place it properly. Here we see a cooperative action between sibling and the young apprentice. Finally, we see how he's reusing and transforming the substrate into a ludic frame. His sister says, "You ready? Go and sell your water." And he starts walking around and says, "Do you want to drink water?" And the aunt said, no, it's too cold. Okay, phase 3. Lowell reduces the substrate. He has failure and frustration. This unfolding learning ecology does not guarantee that he will succeed if he tries to do it on his own. And I have shown you on the video, he stands up and tries to pull the ropes from his back, but it's impossible for him to lift that weight just with his arms operating from the back of his body. At this point, we see an unforeseeable future. The complexity of the contraption and the technique, the particular technique of the body that he needs to carry the thumb line is not working at this point. And the actions that he has learned are not the right ones for embodying this technique to carry the thumb line. He screams, I want to carry it by myself. He gets very upset. I asked him, the only person looking at him with the camera, do you want to carry it on your back? And I said, I want to carry it on my back. Nobody comes to help, even though there is a sister sitting by his side, and she doesn't pay attention to him. So let's see what happens in the phase 4. He starts inhabiting the proper cooperative actions to take this the right body technique to carry the thumb line. He keeps attempting, and finally he sits and places the strap on the right place of the forehead, propels himself with his knees and walks forward and starts saying, I lifted by myself, I lifted by myself, look at me. A very proud moment that is not witnessed by the rest of the group, but by the camera and me being present. So you can see here the two movements which are critical. You can see what the little boy discovered through his hands-on experience and by observing and sharing that thumb-line epistemic ecology of his community. He's exactly doing the same motions as we see with professional people using the thumb line. This is a drawing from Orozco, the muralist painter, who paints a lot of scenes of this kind. And he's exactly using the right technique of the body, which has been adopted through his discovery and also guidance with his sister. We see that this sketched here, and you can compare the first and second drawings with a scene from Orozco, and finally he's able to carry the thumb line. I'll try to show this video. Here he's struggling. I want to carry it on my back. He's getting upset. I want to carry it on my back. And he starts handling the ropes, handling the strap, pulling from behind, a weight that he cannot lift with his arms from behind. Finally, he pulls the strap and assembles it properly. He repeats, I want to carry it on my back, sits down, takes the right posture, and places the strap on the forehead and propels himself forward and starts walking, stumbling down a little bit, but he's now displaying a full proprioceptive skill to carry the thumb line and says, I'm carrying it by myself. Okay. So what we see here is that Lowell's actions are not those of an isolated individual. They go beyond plain imitation. They don't go beyond plain imitation. Through the organization of his own actions, he inhabits relevant actions by incorporated structure and meaning built by other intentional actors he has observed and shared their actions during his everyday life. He's seeing that he's operating and enacting a culturally relevant object through gradual embodiment, leading him to inhabit the relevant actions to use this object. Through his actions, he enacts to an ecology of cooperation within a learning ecology with cooperative participants that validate his actions and align with him epistemically. So Learn has learned a skill through cooperative actions in the situated learning ecology. This was a cumulative process involving the use and transformation of a substrate from his Mayan predecessors. And the interactional emergence of this instillment process reveals the temporal unfolding of endogenous pedagogies. To close this talk, I just want to show this picture from Chuck and Candy in the woods in Chiapas I really thank them for the joyful moments we spent together there and for all the love and friendship and teachings they have given me throughout my life. Thank you. Okay, I stopped sharing now.
Have space for one question right now, and then we'll return to take questions in the end. So could I invite the audience to ask? Okay, so we'll hold questions till the end because people are on the spot. Thank you, Lourdes. And now we're going to continue to the next remote talk, actually.
Oh,
In-person talk? Okay, so we'll continue to the next in-person talk. And this is by, I lost my place now. I lost my place with the titles. Oh, here we go. Okay. This is Teruko Mitsuhara from UCLA on the cooperative co-construction of linguistic empathy among mobile and multilingual children. Thank you.
see. Some version of this, please. I'd love to get rid of that. Well, here we are. Can you see that bar on the side that I can see? Yeah. Does it bother you like it bothers me? No? The blue button? Does go? Oh, look at that. Isn't that nice? Okay. Here we go. So that's me. Well, those aren't me. I'm me. Okay. So throughout his prolific career, Charles Goodwin has argued for the importance of others in our lives. In his theory of cooperative action, he argues that any action, any behavior is built upon the resources provided by predecessors, whether our interlocutors in conversation or the people who've contributed to our socialization. Our actions are built upon theirs in all of their complexity. It is the landmark of Goodwin's approach that is not limited to focus to talk and gesture, but includes among the semiotic resources, the body and space, touch, eye gaze, the built environment, as well as co-present others, shared memories, experiences, and histories. It thus is uniquely positioned to paint a holistic picture of human communication and behavior. Today, I'll show the importance of such a holistic approach when trying to understand interactions among migrant children from different racial, ethnic, and linguistic backgrounds in a small rural village in Mayapur, West Bengal, in northern India. Mayapur is home to 5,000 religious migrants from around the world. This image comes from data that I collected and compiled from the Foreign Registry in Mayapur in 2015. And since the text is really small, I'll point out that the majority of the foreign constituents are from Russia, Australia, and the United States. Large waves of, oh, excuse me, is it still? I'm sorry, I'm not able to see what, oh, okay. That's okay. The large waves of migration started at the turn of the 21st century. They flocked to the region to build a temple as the city center of their religious utopia that began as a prophecy in the 15th century by Indian Saint Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, which then 400 years later became the vision of a global worship in the late 1800s from a Bengali guru, which then became a city-making project in the 1970s. And so this temple is 500 years in the making, but it just broke ground in 2006, triggering a watershed of global migration to rural West Bengal, which has been envisioned as a safe haven for devotees of Krishna, also known as Gaudiya Vaishnavas or Bhakti Yogis or Hare Krishnas as their more popular name in the West, which they acquired once this religion was exported to the United States. And the photos here are from field work between 2015 and 2017 with families who migrated to Mayapur to help make manifest that prophecy and build this religious utopia. And my work was with the kids. The image you saw here and you see here is one that I took while filming the everyday happenings and the conversations of the children that I worked with. The girl on the left in pink is Gopi. She's a Russian immigrant whose family migrated to Mayapur when she was a toddler, and she returns to Russia and Kazakhstan for visa renewals and family visits when possible, but she's spent the majority of her time in Mayapur. The girl in blue is a Bengali girl named Krishangi. She was born and raised in Mayapur, and she's never left India. Now, these two girls, they're neighbors. They attend the same school. They're best friends. They share a lot in life, including linguistic resources. Now, it's no surprise that kids share resources, but for children from varying class, caste, racial, and linguistic backgrounds, opportunities to have encounters that can result in strong bonds are exceedingly rare as nodes of difference harden across communities on these lines. And it's even rarer to find such long-standing bonds between foreigner white and non-white children in the global South. It's been widely documented that power asymmetries which cut across racial lines in the global South are such and the like. Upon migration, they form exclusive clubs, so-called expat communities, and send children to elite international schools in which the children then neither learn with nannies and servants. Except for nannies and servants. This literature depicts a bleak continuance of racial, class, and linguistic apartheid. I'm sorry, my slides are no longer moving. I think it was those 4 extra toes, frankly, that really riled that cat up. And I'd fall asleep and I'd be like, I can't breathe. And I didn't know. And my aunt would lift the cat up and they're just all this cat hair. Oh, here we are. Linguistic apartheid. That was a bad transition. I'm sorry. Here we go. I'll be better. Here we go. The literature depicts a bleak continuation of racial, class, and linguistic divides, what has been called a type of de facto linguistic apartheid. Even in international schools that boast about the national diversity of their students, when it comes to language, children and teenagers orient towards American English as the emblem of Euro-American centric cosmopolitanism, ostracizing those with other accents or who use languages other than English. Mayapur, I argue, stands in stark contrast to this, with children maintaining their home languages, learning English as would be expected in the English medium international school, but unexpectedly learning aspects of their peers' language, with white-skinned children forging friendships, crossing linguistic lines, and brokering for newly arrived migrant peers, and learning the languages of their brown-skinned friends. And one major research question I had because of this was, why? What factors encourage transnational children's multilingualism? One part of this answer has to do with religion. The religion boasts what I term as a apophatic orientation to the self. In apophatic theology, a deity is described in terms of negation. For example, Krishna is non-dual. And I argue that this extends recursively beyond defining Krishna in conversion practices. For Bhakti yogis, following this line of Gaudiya Vaishnavism, there will be this often repeated phrase to converts, to each other, and to children. You're not your body, your race, your bank account, your country, nor your family, for these are all material and temporary. This dissociation with the self as merely material, temporary, and therefore not crucial to one's true identity contributes to this apophatic orientation and provides a backdrop for members of this religion and impacts the attitudes towards other, quote, material problems like ethnic or racial or linguistic divisions. And in addition to this apophatic orientation, in contrast to situations of linguistic apartheid, the main finding was that there exists what I call linguistic empathy. I define it as this patience for multilingual language learning and conversational, quote, mistakes and attempts to communicate. And there's been this recent renewed interest in the topic of empathy from a variety of perspectives, but for my purposes here, I follow Doug Holland, who asserts that what is taken as empathy in many parts of the world is not merely a mental ability of inhabiting another's mind or perspective, but rather responding to another's needs or concerns through one's action or inaction. And I argue that linguistic empathy stems from growing up in this particular religious community that promotes bodily dissociation, as well as the children's personal experiences of not understanding the many languages in one's environment due to frequent circular migration. And this interplay of religious ideologies and personal migration experiences leads to an action-based imperative to translate, broker for non-native peer speakers in interaction. So let's see an example. I'm going to shift to some video data that shows an interaction between a Black Argentinian child and a Russian child, Vanamali and Nitai. They're two 3-year-old boys who attend nursery. Vanamali's lived in Mayapur for 2 years with his Russian parents. And while he can speak in English, his language of comfort is Russian. And Nitai is a monolingual Spanish-speaking Argentinian boy who's arrived 3 months prior to this interaction being filmed. And both Nitai's parents speak Spanish at home, and they can converse minimally in English. And in the video, I hope you'll be able to see them interact with their nursery teacher, Priya, who's from Ukraine and who's lived in Mayapur for more than 5 years at the time. She speaks Ukrainian, Russian, English, and basic conversational Bengali. Other children in the classroom speak Bengali, Kannada, Hindi, Oriya, Latvian, and Russian. And Nitai is the only Spanish-speaking child and is one of 2 biracial kids in the class. So let's hope that this works. I'm going to play it.
Yeah, you don't need to take
No.
this.
No. This brown. I don't want them. What do you say? Hello? I don't.
No, it's this.
Spider.
Where is the gopi?
Spider.
Where is the gopi?
Spider.
Mother, Spider. You took a spider. You turned water on him. And what happened to spider? You see, maybe the spider died. Don't do like that. Okay?
So now they're good friends because of that nice little cute moment. Okay. All right. So you see here that Nitai tries to tell a story to his teacher Priya about a spider that he encountered at a sink in the classroom, but doesn't yet have the English or the Russian word spider in his repertoire. He wiggles his fingers in a crawling fashion. Vanamali eventually asks in English, "Spider, is that spider?" Through this interaction, Nitai's story is understood. This is made possible because of the empathic cooperative interaction with Vanamali and later their teacher. In that interaction, Nitai is trying to tell their teacher Priya something that seems important. His main obstacle is that he doesn't speak any of the languages in Priya's repertoire, Russian, Ukrainian, English, or Bengali. Nitai's communication would have been lost, except that Vanamali, a Russian and ESL classmate, decides to broker his communication. From lines 1 to 21, Nitai attempts to tell his story. You don't need to read it here. I'll say it out loud, so please don't strain your eyes. Nitai attempts to tell his story to Priya while 4 other children watch him struggle to converse. And you can see that image here. They're watching this. He secures his teacher's attention, calling her Mataji in line 1. She turns her gaze to him. Nitai uses his entire right hand and wiggles all his fingers, saying this. The image there shows the gestures he's made in line 3, and Priya makes it 2 attempts to understand what Nitai is trying to communicate. She first assumes that he's asking for something and responds, "Yeah, you don't need to take this." Nitai interrupts, no, and repeats his spider crawling hand, but this time moving it across in space. This, he announces, is what he's trying to talk about. And to Nitai's frustration, Priya makes a thumbs up hand gesture, resulting in more no, and an uptick of forceful spider crawl gestures from Nitai. And at this point, Priya watches him attempt to verbalize a sentence as he utters, "I round, E, I throw." He's gesturing with both hands. And at this point, he just drops his hands before uttering water. Priya and the 4 other children, they continue to watch him, but they're unable to understand what he means. So in multilingual and other settings, gesture has been shown to be an important communicative strategy. But the thing is that you have to know what these gestures mean to be able to interpret them. And no one is actively looking until Vanamali puts his body between Nitai and Priya and is wondering it tries to figure out for himself what Nitai is saying. Vanimali interrupts the exchange and he goes and says, "What do you say? Talk to me." Promoted by Vanimali, Nitai repeats his story using gestures, shoulder shrugs, and the following English words: I, no, throw, from, this, look. Knowing the end result of Nitai's story and reading those English words in sequence, ascertaining that he somehow threw water on some crawling thing seems easy to discern. However, in the moment, these meanings were difficult to establish. And at the end of this 69-second exchange, we learned that the story Nitai wanted to tell was that he found a spider in the washroom sink and he threw water on it, which made it go down the sink. His success in this communication is very much reliant on Vanimali, who makes repeated efforts to understand and to confirm his own understanding of his gestures. And in this way, gestures become a vehicle, I argue, for linguistic empathy and interaction. We see that Nitai nods his head yes to Vanimali's 3 clarification questions and verbally assents an increasing intensity for each inquisition, the biggest agreement being in lines 43 and 44. Nitai is striving to achieve understanding, and he's only able to do it because of Vanimali acting as interpreter of his gestures and his limited vocabulary. Charles Goodwin analyzes a case that has a family resemblance with the one that I've just described. A man named Chill has aphasia and is able to communicate by using a 3-word vocabulary, prosody, and gesture. His utterances are interpreted by his family and his friends, all who together help him become a powerful speaker able to produce complex propositions by cooperatively interacting with transformation into his own actions, rich language structure created by others. And this is made possible by the fact that people in his environment are family and longtime friends who have an already established and shared life world with him. They are thus able to draw from their memories, their stories, and mutually known environment to build conversation. Conversely, in the example that we just saw, Nitai is a newly arrived 3.5-year-old foreign migrant to the village who doesn't share a language with anyone else in the classroom, let alone a deep life world that they could draw upon in order to communicate successfully. With almost 3 months in the nursery, he's come to grasp that he needs to use what we call English words to communicate, and in fact only uses one Spanish word, e, in the entire sentence. His utterances are fragmented with nested gestures, and his story calls out for someone to interpret and broker possible meanings for others. And locating an individual who can and then will display what I call linguistic empathy among strangers or new friends, it's difficult. Children have been shown to overcome such language and social barriers in play activities in which there's often a framework in which rules are understood and verbal communication isn't imperative. But for Nitai's narrative, there's no play frame from which to extrapolate meaning and no bond really beyond those 3 months of class that would allow him breadth of experience with Nitai. As soon as Vanimali is sure that his interpretation is correct, he turns to his teacher, gets her attention, and says he wanted to tell you that he touched a spider. So he moves behind Nitai. He points to him, thus emphasizing on whose behalf he's speaking. Vanimali is not fully translating for Nitai, as he's only the one word that he's confirmed is that Nitai wants to discuss is spider. Vanimali also added a story surrounding the spider. He wanted to tell you that he touched a spider. And we learn that this isn't the case, but that Nitai actually put water on the spider and it fell down the drain. Vanimali isn't translating for Nitai, then he's brokering his communication. Well, we won't play that again. So in Mayapur, linguistic empathy isn't limited to merely a mental process of understanding their shared experiences, but it propels them to use linguistic resources to aid one another in communication or learning how to communicate. One interview that I had with a 13-year-old girl at the time, she's recounting her time as a monolingual Portuguese-speaking girl from Brazil, and it captures this sense. I asked her about her experience when she arrived in Mayapur. It's hard to get here and only be able to talk to your family. I know what it's like, so I try to help new kids when I can. It's easier, of course, than when I first got here. I wish my Bengali was better. I can speak English now, and I'm better at Bengali than my parents, so I help them when I can. And I want to learn more. I think it'll be easier later. And it will be easier, I think, later. So this sentiment that there's struggle in communication as part of the course for migration is where empathy becomes a useful frame to understand children's attention toward language brokering and patience for and encouragement in speaking other languages and helping in conversations. I think I'm actually at time. So I'm just going to say this analysis was not possible without Chuck Goodwin's cooperative action, his theory of everything, and taking the many layers, the hundreds of years that it took to get to that temple being built, for the migrations coming, for the the many gurus and the thinkers and the evangelizers that brought all of those people together. It's a long history that has allowed that apophatic orientation to then all of a sudden influence how these children are interacting with each other. And that right there is for me the big contribution for Chuck's whole corpus for linguistic anthropology, is that all of that history, it matters. Thank you so much.
What makes social differentiation is what makes for people from like an Andean region and the Amazonian region have their various different identities. And here you're showing how empathy is so critical for creating not differentiation, but being able to live together in this beautiful situation. I mean, I just wanted to say it was beautiful and expressed everything that Chuck was trying to aim at, and so beautifully illustrated too in the way that you put together the presentation too.
Well, thank you so much, Candy. I really appreciate that. I was like, yeah, it's a theory of everything, and it works so very well. Yeah, I have nothing but gratitude for the Goodwin's contributions. So wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Our next panelist is E. Mara Green, and the title of her talk is Towards an Ethics of Interaction.
Hi, I think I need the permission. Oh, I have the permission. Amazing. Can you all see the PowerPoint? That looks like a yes?
Yes.
Fantastic. Okay. Thank you. Before I start, oh, that's the ending. I'm so sorry. I spoiled the ending. Okay.
What we see is it's not in play mode. I'm not sure if that matters for it. We can see the other things too.
That's okay. Can you see the talk or just like the
we see the title slide right now, and then kind of the whatever program you were using to make it.
Got it. No, that's okay. That actually has to happen because otherwise I can't read my own talk. So thanks for letting me know. Hi, everybody. It's such an honor to have been asked to be part of this panel. Before I begin the actual talk, I just want to note if you would like an access copy, it can be found for the next hour and a half at https://tinyurl.com/green access copy. So the title of my presentation today is Toward a Theory of Ethics in Emergent Language. My first encounter with Chuck's work came before I actually met him in person, and it was the chapter Human Sociality as Mutual Orientation in the edited volume Roots of Human Sociality. In this chapter, Chuck describes his work with his father, Chill, who, as our last speaker just talked about, had had a stroke and whose articulatory communicative resources have been reduced to intonational contours, rhythmic prosody, the words yes and no, and pointing. In beautiful detail, Chuck shows how Chill was able to have rich, satisfying conversations with the cooperative participation of interlocutors who often voiced what they thought he was trying to say. In the course of this analysis, Chuck makes a quiet claim, a single sentence tucked into a section called Pointing in Aphasia. He writes, attributing communicative intent to another's sounds and gesture, and thereby treating that person as a full-fledged human being capable of performing relevant consequential action and being willing to do the work to find out what the other is saying, has not only a cognitive dimension, but also a moral one. While most of the chapter focuses on how Chill and his interlocutors together do the work, it's worth noting that this sentence comes at the end of a paragraph about how Chill's doctors ignored his attempts to communicate that they had incorrectly inserted his catheter. And this is a kind of unwillingness to which I will return. Chuck's attention to the moral dimensions of communication has been enormously productive in my work with deaf signers across several distinct settings. These are situations that are very different than Chill's, but they together constitute instances of a category that I've come to think of as emergent language. That is, cases wherein the conventional and so often taken for granted resources of languages like English or American Sign Language are in some sense not available. So just to be very explicit, I'm not claiming that signed languages belong to this category of emergent language a priori. In conversation with Chuck and Chill, this paper seeks to examine the powerful consequences of the ordinary yet potentially life-altering action of attending to what another might have to say. The first site I want to focus on is International Sign, or IS, in the context of the World Federation of the Deaf, or WFD, an international deaf organization. IS refers to how signers who don't have a signed language in common, they have their own signed languages, but very different ones, nevertheless communicate. IS by definition involves the recruitment and invention of resources from various sources. It's characterized by variation, by improvisation, and by what Bill Moody, an IS interpreter, described as a, quote, atmosphere of attentiveness and heightened relationship. This produces what an 1815 observer of international signing called a delicious sensation. In 2007, I was able to attend the WFD's Quadrennial World Congress held in Madrid, Spain. During the Congress's myriad events, the WFD provided multiple interpreting teams, usually of international sign, and then because it was in Spain, Spanish Sign Language, including both deaf and hearing professionals. Attendees were welcome to bring their own sign language interpreters too. This was in sharp contrast to the pre-Congress meeting of the General Assembly, the WFD's governing body. Here, interpreters were banned entirely, and during the two-day meeting, the delegates from over 100 different countries were asked to communicate directly with each other through international sign. I like to imagine here what would happen if the UN General Assembly decided to ban interpreters. Interestingly, according to a study commissioned by the WFD, most experts didn't consider IS to be a language. Of course, we can debate what a language is, but the point is that the WFD itself doesn't consider it to be. This makes the GA's requirement even more striking, a self-imposed demand that delegates with dozens of different language backgrounds communicate in the mode that, according to its own report, isn't a language. The ability of IS to work at all, let alone in a setting like the General Assembly, has been explained historically and by contemporary researchers in terms of the representational affordances of the visual gesture modality. Such affordances are indeed critical. However, in trying to understand why the GA uses IS, it became equally important for me to think about the relational dimensions of IS and how deaf signers consider the capacity to understand each other across difference to be a particular valuable feature of communal deaf life. In other words, I argue that IS relies on and produces moral orientation. So with this concept, I'm directly drawing on Chuck's work with Chill and on this quiet claim about morality, as well as on Bill Hanks's work on communicative practices, and particular where he writes that, quote, in order for two or more people to communicate, it is neither sufficient nor necessary that they share the same grammar. What they must share is the ability to orient themselves to each other and to their social world, end quote. Sorry. Moral orientation, then, is the socially expected turning of one's corporeal, cognitive, and moral attention towards another. With international sign, moral orientation motivates the practice of communicating across difference, and this practice then further produces moral orientation. Deaf signers value IS in part for the work it requires and the heightened relational experiences it produces. The General Assembly's policy then is an institutionalization of a shared deaf value. in the absence of interpreters, and that includes deaf interpreters, communicating in IS both demands and cultivates moral orientation. The work of understanding is as important, if not more important, than understanding itself. But what happens when social norms around working to understand are not distributed as thickly and homogeneously as in this or in other deaf-centered spaces? I turn here to my much longer term research in Nepal, where I work with users of both Nepali Sign Language, or NSL, and what NSL signers call natural sign. Natural sign is a translation of the term, natural sign is a translation of an NSL term for sign communication that doesn't take place in NSL, nor in another national signed language. Natural sign is what is used by the majority of deaf Nepalis, those who are not part of Nepal's Baida Samaj, or deaf society. As I analyze it then, natural sign in Nepal involves small repertoires of conventional signs that are widely available to both deaf and hearing people. This repertoire is complemented by iconic and indexical strategies that take advantage of the immanence of signs in the socio-material world. On the one hand, I witnessed natural sign conversations about politics, kinship, historical events, dreams for the future, conversations that were flirtatious, serious, playful, mundane. On the other hand, I witnessed natural sign conversations where a deaf signer was ignored, misunderstood, or called a liar. Not, of course, that deaf signers cannot lie, but here I argue people became known as unreliable narrators, even of their own lives, in part because of the accrual of misunderstandings. As with international sign, the affordances and constraints of signs themselves is critical here, as is the fact that deaf natural signers' most frequent interlocutors are hearing people for whom natural sign is not a primary mode of communication. Yet these factors on their own do not explain the variability in how natural sign is taken up, understood, and responded to or not. Returning to Chuck's quiet claim, it is also necessary to attend to the orientations that natural signers' interlocutors display towards communicating with them and towards trying to make sense. Given my previous theorization of moral orientation as a shared social value, I use the term ethics in my work on natural sign to emphasize the heterogeneity of orientations, both within and across interlocutors, as well as their consequences. Here's an example, and I should state that the two hearing women who I'm about to describe, there was no, it's not like one of them was a family member of a deaf person or anything like that. One day in June 2010 in Monoguduk, a village in eastern Nepal, Hirabasna, a 50-year-old deaf woman, signed to a younger hearing woman as they stood in a tea shop surrounded by wooden tables and plastic water pitchers. Speaking Nepali, the hearing woman said that she didn't understand as her gaze slid away from Hira's hands and face. A second young hearing woman present exclaimed, "She said you should come to her house and her daughter-in-law will make you tea. Don't you even understand that much?" As this vignette illustrates, eye gaze embodies both the demonstration and the doing of willingness, or the demonstration and doing of refusal. Prior to my ethnographically informed interest in eye gaze, I hadn't thought much about the topic. And so I was absolutely delighted when I went to the literature to find that Chuck had helped to lay the groundwork for thinking about eye gaze in conversation. In his 1981 book, Chuck describes how one way a non-speaking party can indicate whether he is acting as a hearer is by gazing at the speaker. A speaker can use gaze to indicate that the party being gazed at is an addressee of his utterance. Moreover, Chuck explained, speakers monitor whether or not they are being watched and take actions such as verbal restarts to, quote, secure the gaze and orientation of hearers, end quote. In other words, people watch each other, they watch each other, and they attribute meaning to what they see. The use of eye gaze to negotiate and co-create the grounds of conversation is very similar to what deaf studies scholar Ben Bahan describes for ASL signers as well. While eye gaze is important for sighted speakers, for visual signers, without watching someone sign, understanding or responding becomes entirely impossible. Looking at someone as they sign tethers people together as co-actants in the world, while looking away, at least momentarily, nullifies such a possibility. While with Hira, looking and not looking was embodied by two different people, in this final example, a shift in eye gaze and a shift in one person's eye gaze and orientation is evident. On a Sunday afternoon in the same village, I visited the home of Laxman Vishwakarma, a deaf man in his 40s. The video still that's shown on this slide demonstrates that there are 7 people sitting in a rough circle around an outdoor blacksmithing forge. Laxman, who is in the red shirt, is seated on a bench between me and his hearing neighbor, and my friend Bola Thapa, behind the camera and thus not pictured, is also deaf. Everyone else is hearing. Prior to the moment shown here, Laxman and the neighbor had briefly signed with each other, but when Bola encouraged them to talk more, the neighbor signed that he couldn't sign and then rendered himself a non-participant by visually disengaging. As this image shows, while conversations in a mixture of natural sign, NSL, and spoken Nepali took place, the neighbor gazed resolutely at the forge. Eventually, however, he was coaxed into joining the conversation. And at first, when asked if he was understanding what was happening, he said no, but of course he hadn't been looking. However, this next image shows him directly looking at Laxman. And in the course of the next few minutes, it became evident that the neighbor could say quite a bit in sign, answering questions, responding to correction in his signing, describing his experiences abroad, and making jokes. This final image is a photograph of Chuck, myself, and Terra Edwards, who will speak soon, at the 2017 AAAs, or rather at a wine bar cafe nearby. I conclude my presentation by drawing our attention to a tension in my field sites, both the importance and the unimportance of conventional language. As Chuck has analyzed at length, the availability of grammatical structures offers one out of many resources for the cooperative construction of meaning and relationality. And Chuck's work with Chill emphasizes how when you don't have a linguistic code that is fully elaborated, fully shared, or as with Chill, fully articulable, the co in the cooperative action needs to be willing to do the work. Building on these insights, what my research with both IS and natural signs shows is the degree to which conventional grammar offers its users ethical scaffolds. Put another way, grammar releases its users from at least some of the moral and ethical labor required in its absence. In the case of IS, this additional labor is valued and valuable. In the case of natural sign, it is a site of potential vulnerability for deaf signers, whose hearing interlocutors may or may not be invested in co-constructing a conversation. As a final word, I want to thank Chuck Goodwin again for his investment in making meaning, in sharing space and joy, in short, for being a most wonderful co to so many people. Thank you.
Okay, we'll save questions for more towards the end. Thank you so much, Mara. Our next presenter is Julia Katila and Johanne Philipsen, and their paper is entitled "The Interactional Emergence of an Experiencing Face, the Cooperative and Intercorporeal Aspects of the Face During Kissing Between Romantic Partners."
Okay, right. Let me share the screen. Optimize for video and share sound. Hopefully this all goes well. Okay. Can you all see my screen? It's not still in the presentation mode, but
Yes, we can.
yes. Okay, okay, good. Okay, right. I'm going to hide this. Float meeting controls. Okay. I don't see anyone here, but if something happens or you cannot hear, so just shout out, please. Right. Okay, let's do the slideshow. Okay. Yay. Hello, everyone. I'm super excited to be here, even if it's almost 2 a.m. in Finland. My name is Katila, and I have been working on this presentation together with my friend and colleague Johanne, who is also here. And in this presentation, we wish to identify and analyze facial expressions during kisses among romantic couples, and identify something that we call experiencing face during those moments. Yeah, and the very basis of our research, as for most people here, starting with the citation by Chuck, is we draw from the cooperative action view, the human sociality. According to Chuck, by building our own actions with the very same resources used by others before us, we inhabit each other's actions. This means that no recognizable action, such as showing affection through kissing and hugging, would even be possible or recognizable without the history of these embodied practices and the ways they have been used by our predecessors. And this is true even if each moment of action and relationship is always unique and continuously produced in a new novel now. A little bit just like a very basic background. It has been shown by countless previous studies from different fields unambiguously that affective touch, especially kisses and hugs, play a crucial role in maintaining affection in intimate relationships. A good example here is Candy and Asta studies, which many of us know have shown how effective embodied choreographies involving touch occur in the everyday daily round of families. Now, there's one previous interaction study focused on especially on the emergence of facial expressions during kissing, and that is Kendon's pioneering paper on kissing rounds among romantic couples. Now, we draw from this paper, though in our study, we are not only interested in the pattern nature of facial expressions, but also how the facial expressions make visible the participants orienting towards experiencing the kiss. And here we especially draw from Candy and Chuck's paper on the thinking phase, in which they uncover how participants of interaction moment by moment make visible their ongoing orienting, for instance, towards the cognitive process of thinking, or in our case, it's more of an emotion towards tactile and affective moments shared by the intimate partners. And therefore, we want to highlight not only the interactional and cooperative, but also the intercorporeal and experienced aspect of touch and how it is expressed in face during these intimate moments. Just quickly a little bit on the data. Basically, it's video recording of 10 Finnish couples. I've spent 1 week with each couple, video recording with 4 to 5 video cameras for 10 to 20 hours a day, also interviewing the couples afterwards. So there's a lot of video data here. Now, what is experiencing face? Something we notice in the data is that during kisses and hugs, the face of the participants is often momentarily harnessed not only into displaying, but actually experiencing the tactile moment. Right during the moment of kiss, the faces often wear this very particular facial expression, which shows that they are enjoying experiencing the other person's tactile co-presence and fully engaged in the moment. The eyes are often closed, making visible an involvement to the inner experience. And yeah, it's maybe best go to the example. So our example today is a female couple. They've been together for 4 years. The participants, before the clip starts, the participants have just returned from work on a weekday and they are cooking something together. On the right-hand side, there's participant 1, and on the left side, participant 2. Before the hugging and kissing sequence, just before it occurs, the participants engage with each other through this light-hearted banter and co-laughter, which sort of opens the floor for the affective moment to occur. And let's watch this whole thing once and for all, and then go watching that frame by frame. Let fingers crossed this, you can hear it and see it. Right, because nobody mentioned anything, so I assume that you could hear that and all. Anyway, so as we can see at first of all, we can witness that accomplishing the shared experience of tactile affection requires careful, embodied co-participation from both participants. When participant 1 reaches towards participant 2 kind of sort of tilts her head towards participant 1 and leans against her body to allow her body to be hugged. The eyes of the participants close and their faces emerge in the experiencing face expression almost simultaneously. At the same time, participant 1 utters, "I missed you," with this very affective tone of the voice, which is verbalizing the emotions embedded in the hug, as well as accounting her urge to be in the touch with her partner. As follows, we can sort of witness this multisensorial moment of experiencing the other, where the facial expression co-emerges with touch and sound. Let's watch that once more. Here, closing the eyes is a crucial aspect of orienting to the experience. The fact that it's not necessarily visible to the other participant makes it even more so of a social contract based on trust that the other person is also closing their eyes and also enjoying the moment and making an emotional commitment to orienting towards the shared bodily engagement. In an important way, it is about the relationship and spending a moment in sensing being together. And during such intense and temporarily prolonged tactile intercorporeality, the participants are able to orient towards their interoceptive experience, which refers to the perception of sensations from inside the body, including the perception of physical sensations related to the internal organ functions, such as the heartbeat. And being close to each other, being touched, partially enables sensing the other body as well, and for instance, sensing the other person's heartbeat. After the expanded moment of this tactile being with, there is this quick withdrawal from the hug into this intense facial formation, then upgrading the intimacy into a kiss, and once more this micro withdrawal into facial formation, and then one more kiss before the withdrawal from the kissing arrangement to return to their previous activities. Let's watch that again. Here, the kisses and hugs occur in a rhythmic pattern of withdrawal and kiss. The participants constantly monitor each other's bodies, trajectories in order not to withdraw from the kiss too early or too late. It is as if the bodies would just kind of know the right tempo of touching and being touched, or withdrawing, merging into the kiss. And besides of the careful mutual embodied attunement, it is certainly the history of the participants' relationship and the countless previous kisses that make the flow-like emergence of these actions possible. And just quickly before the closing slide, I actually just today interviewed this particular couple, and I would show them all clips from their own interactions so they could kind of say what they themselves were thinking about them. And there are a few things that they said about this particular kiss that we just saw. Like participant one would say, these are the moments of feeling grounded. And afterwards, I feel way more calm, like especially after work day and it has been hectic and so on. And participant would say, this is our usual way of refueling. That's what she would say, like referring to refueling love. One needs those moments, even if it's just for a brief second. There is so much in those moments. Right, and just few conclusions in the end. Now there is a careful interrelationship between touch and face in the moments of affection. The experiencing face both experiences and communicates experiences. Experiencing makes visible the moment by moment, orienting in the moment, orienting towards the affective touch. That is, it is both an affective stance and an experience of the affect. The emergence of the experience phase is inherently multisensorial. You can see the orally sensed smiley and the tactile sensed facial expressions when the faces are very close to each other. You can kind of sense the touch of the other person's facial expression. That is, the whole bodies and their expressions are entirely intertwined. And yeah, the facial expressions are those of, this is kind of self-evident, but sometimes forgotten, but they are those of actual living bodies which are experiencing, communicating, cooperative, all that at the same time. Right, thank you. And yeah, also in my part, Chuck has influenced so much my thinking, and I just want to thank all that and very grateful to be here. Let's end the show. Okay. Oh, I will wait. Okay. Let me see how I can stop the sharing. Usually the oh man, I cannot find the Zoom.
We figured it out on our.
You were able to do that?
Sorry.
Oh, good. Okay. Sorry about it. Okay. Yeah.
Playing the
Yulia, did you hear that?
No, you were just muted. I don't know if somebody would say something. I'm sorry, I didn't hear anything.
That's okay. I can ask it again. I was for when you would replay the videos back to the couples themselves. Did they know? I guess there's two questions, or maybe three. It's an academic conference. There's like 5 in one. So when you would replay the videos back, did they know? Like, how did they react to the clips that you chose to like extract, and then 2, going into it, were they aware that you would be investigating or researching intimacy and touch? So, yeah.
Well, I start with the second one. The whole project is affective practices and touch among romantic couples. So yes, they knew it's about like embodied interaction, especially, but it's not only about touch and affect, that like affect mainly also, but also verbal and all other interaction. But yes, they knew that that's the main thing. And were you asking that how they reacted? Well, at least for clips like this, they were just, of course, very happy, and like, yeah, of course, also like looking at your own interaction is sometimes like kind of maybe embarrassing. So sometimes they were like, oh, but very, yeah, like for instance, with this clip, they were just like, this is nice to see, and it looks how it feels. That's what they would say. So, yeah. Thank you for the questions.
Yeah, thank you. Anybody else?
I was wondering about the fact that the one person is stationed and does not disengage from holding on to a drawer so can you say something about that? And because I know you've been looking at people who are interacting in the midst of very daily tasks. So what kind of patterns can you find about whether or not people have full engagement, partial engagement, because they're interrupting a task that they're involved in?
That's a great question. So just a quick response is that my analysis, I literally, this is my, or next one is my final couple. So I literally just am still continuing, but almost stopping my data collection, but I really haven't done the all very systematic analysis yet to be answered that properly, what sorts of patterns. But that is very interesting. Like, yeah, the participant too, she's still like kind of holding on her previous interaction project. So she's not like entirely, invested in the same way as the other person. She, participant one, she kind of like leaves what she's cooking something, and she leaves the cooking and kind of goes on and hacks. So yeah, it is interesting how there's a little difference in the levels of investment, something to look at in future for sure. Thanks for the question.
So just to follow up on that a little bit, I would find it interesting to see when those recognized signs cross over into miscommunicating because they're encumbered. So how much do you have to give to signal, yeah, I'm part of this, for it to even be registered at all, versus I'm even more in than a partial. So this reminds me of what I see when people are dealing with encumbered sign in sign language research. At what point do you lose the signal because there's been too much compromising of the articulation? Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah, that is very interesting, and indeed, and sometimes in the interviews, the couples point out that there is asymmetry, that the other person initiates more the hugs and kisses. So there might be these asymmetries a little bit, and also in the level of commitment. So yeah.
Add something to that, Julia?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. Just I'm the silent partner here, so the silent partner in crime. But it's a very interesting question, and actually we discussed it quite a lot when looking at the data, and I think that a crucial part, at least, well, now we've been very invested in these facial expressions, but it seems like at least gaze plays a very significant role in this. So the orientation, and she does this, the partner that is partially invested in her interaction project still with, or not interaction project, but cooking project, I guess. So she is orienting towards, of course, her partner, and also towards this inner experience that they're sharing together as part of showing her investment in the kiss and the hug activity. And so I think there are various different modalities that can be engaged in for showing how invested you are in the project. Yeah, that was a partial answer.
Yeah, thank you for that question. That's an interesting point.
This is just a general announcement. So since we started about 20 minutes late, I just asked the organizers, there's nothing in this room after 5, so we can still continue with the regular schedule, 2 more papers, and then leave a little bit discussion at the end. The keynote, the next event in the conference is starting at 6:15. So if you don't mind, you are welcome to stay a little over 5 for a general discussion after the next, after the final 2 papers.
Thank you so much to Julia and Johanna. And now our next presentation is by Terra Edwards of University of Chicago, Situating Language Emergence, Protactile Intuition in Grammar and Beyond.
Thank you. I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, you can all see the PowerPoint. I actually can't see any of you though.
Yes, we can see it. Oh, well, now it's in the, we see.
Yeah.
Okay.
I just can't see any of you, so I was just going to try to allow you to see that while I can still see you. I don't know. Oh, well, okay. I won't be able to see you.
But yes, we can see it. Good.
Okay, good. It was the summer of 2014, and Chuck and I were sitting outside at the Gesture Conference held that year at the University of California, San Diego. At some point, a couple of students pulled up chairs. After listening for a while, one of them asked, "What is CA?" Chuck said, CA is California, and we both laughed. Decomposition and reuse with transformation. I guess after all of those years analyzing cooperative action, it isn't surprising that he was good at it. Some of the earliest conversations I had with Chuck when I was in graduate school were about what he called the substrate, or whatever was decomposed and reused with transformation. He had shown how grammatical resources, such as the syntactic structure of the language in use, can be part of the substrate, while other aspects are operated on against that structure as backdrop. This is one of his examples. What's the matter? What's the matter with you? Same thing that's the matter with you. Well, nothing's the matter with me. Well, nothing's the matter with me then. In this example, arguments and phrases are added, taken away, or substituted against the consistent backdrop of a particular syntactic structure. Each of those substitutions, additions, or subtractions opens up additional possibilities for decomposition and transformation in the next turn. In other words, language games like these open up a prospective space of combinatorial possibilities. In my own research, my aim is to show how grammatical systems can not only serve as the backdrop for operations like this, but can also be subject to those operations. Nearly all of the people I work with were born deaf, acquired American Sign Language as a first language, and then became blind slowly over the course of many years. At some point, visual communication became untenable, and they sought out a community where they could learn effective communication practices. Thanks to a deafblind employment program established in the late 1970s at the Lighthouse for the Blind, Seattle became a destination for many. When I showed up as an undergraduate interpreting student in the 1990s, communication conventions revolved entirely around sighted interpreters, so that deafblind people rarely communicated directly with one another at all. Then in 2007, a social movement known as the pro-tactile movement started gaining ground. Deafblind leaders argued that excessive reliance on interpreters had turned the environment into a memory or a description of itself, which was not easily inhabited and over time was deteriorating. They decided that the only way to address that problem was to get deafblind people together without interpreters and figure out how to communicate. Going into these interactions, they had the more or less degraded lexico-grammatical resources from ASL that they had acquired as children, but the channels, sensory orientations, and experiences that had shaped that system had made it unusable because they were fundamentally visual. Their task then was to rechannel their language, which involved, as one deafblind person told me, turning ASL into a junkyard and selling it for parts. Since 2010, colleagues and I have been tracking that process ethnographically and via analysis of video recordings of language use and interaction, and have found that the basic units out of which signs are composed have changed, so that in place of hand shapes, locations, and movements of American Sign Language, which are perceived against the visible backdrop of the signer's body, protactile signs can be decomposed into units like proprioceptive object and movement contact type, which contrast with one another against the proprioceptive backdrop of the addressee's body. We've since shown that those new units are also subject to new combinatory patterns. So both the contrasted field of units and their principled combination differ from patterns found in the ambient languages, ASL and English. In other words, a new language is emerging. This has led to a distinction between tactile reception of a visual sign language and a language that is optimized to the tactile modality. And we consider only the latter to be a tactile language. You can compare that distinction to lip reading. Lip reading is visual reception of a spoken language, but it's not a visual language in the way that ASL is, for example. A key moment in uncovering emerging linguistic patterns came in 2015 when Diane Brentari, a phonologist who is now a close collaborator, came with me to the field. She already knew ASL, but when she tried to use it in a protactile context, she was frequently scolded and with a distinctive kind of irritation. The irritable response was fast and forceful and focused on what felt to Diane like minor differences. Every time someone yelled at her, she smiled wider and made a mental note of a possible rule. For Diane, that type of irritation is a sign of intuition, a key heuristic for some linguists in identifying grammatical patterns and constraints. And if you look at data from 5 years before these events of irritation, you see no such responses from the same people, biographically speaking, when they received the same kinds of structures or signs then. I'm not going to be able to convince you of the idea that new linguistic intuitions have emerged in 12 minutes and also make my main point. So I'm going to ask that you take that observation on faith for now. But what I want to highlight is the fact that the kinds of intuitions that scan to phonologists as signs of well-formedness judgments are related historically and structurally to intuitions about the organization of interaction, and that cooperative action, in Chuck's sense, can account for those connections. In order to understand the main argument, you have to have a minimal sense of one key phonological observation that we've made. So I'm not going to play this whole thing, but I just want you to notice that all 4 of their articulators are actively involved in describing this lollipop. So in 2015, the articulatory system had already moved to this 4-handed system. But when you compare that to non-protactile articulations of the same thing, and you'll see something related in a moment, you see that there are two active articulators. They both belong to the same person, and the listener's hands are strictly in a listening role. They aren't actively producing signs. So in a 2020 paper, just to summarize our findings, we found that protactile language was assigning meaningful and phonologically constrained roles to anatomical structures that were different from ASL. The order and form of units in proprioceptive constructions, which are those kinds of four-handed constructions I just showed you, were subject to well-formedness constraints. Okay, so before those phonological problems emerged patterns emerged that I just showed, conventional back channeling signals had become ubiquitous. So I just want to show you, this is 5 years before the video that I just showed you. And the person on the right is the conveyor of information. And you can see how she's signing with two hands, and the person listening to her is listening with two hands. So that's just a brief glimpse, but you can see that in order to get that back channeling signal in there, the listener has to sign the ASL word for yes, which is this. And that sign can't really be produced at the same time. And so there's this kind of stilted quality to the interaction. And the reason for that is that in ASL, there are two articulators and they work together in systematic ways. And in 2010, they were using that articulatory system, which meant they had no extra articulators lying around for other functions like back channeling. So that's the two, just so you can see, the two-handed production and two-handed reception. That was the convention in 2010. So now we fast forward to 2018. And here the person on the left is saying something about how you can or can't borrow ASL signs into protactile language. And he gives an example of something ridiculous. And then he says, he and his interlocutor both react at the same time saying, no, 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 no. And then the addressee gives some additional positive feedback, which you can see on the thigh of the person on the left. No, 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 no. So there's a lot going on in that clip, but what I'm hoping that you can see is that there was a back channeling system that was highly conventional and it made a huge difference for participants. But when I asked people to define different back channeling signals early on, they'd say it's not like there's a list of them with meanings, it's just intuitive, like facial expressions. So one question I've been asking is, in what sense are these signals intuitive? And answers to that question appear when you look at the phenomenon in a historical frame. So for example, before these people became blind, they were deaf-sighted people. And among deaf-sighted people, tapping and hearing-sighted people is often used for attention getting. But in the protactile context, this signal was repurposed and transformed via a reversal. Rather than being a request for attention, it became a sign of attention. So there was decomposition and reuse with transformation. Looking at the data collected over the past decade diachronically, it's clear that back channeling was conventionalized first via a reorganization of the articulators. That then presented new possibilities for phonology, leading ultimately to the emergence of a new phonological system. What I'm finding then is that many things that are deemed intuitive by protactile people have stories that can be told about them, like this. There's been a tendency among linguists to attribute the emergence of new linguistic systems to universal innate capacities, and there might be something like that at play. But when you watch things develop slowly over time, it seems that pre-existing systems are decomposed and their elements are put to new uses in systems that emerge later. So my main argument is that cooperation can reveal the production of intuition by prompting us to attend to how older and more familiar things are made useful in new ways, and yet retain some of that familiarity in the process. This suggests a potentially generative line of inquiry for those of us interested in language emergence, which would focus not only on how grammatical systems can form part of the substrate for cooperative action, but also how they can be shaped by cooperative action. Thanks to Chuck for sending me in this direction and for his enthusiastic and generous engagements over the year, which continue and will continue to shape my thinking. Thank you.
Thank you, Tara. That was mind blowing. I mean, literally, I'm at a loss, but we're going to hold questions to the very end of the session now. And our next presenter is Jan Hauck with the Cooperative Transformation and Reproduction of Culture in Aceh Children's Songs.
Hear me? Okay, good. Oh, for coming. Sorry for the. Okay. All right, third try. Thank you all for coming. Sorry for the delay. And yeah, it's a great privilege to be parts of such a fantastic session celebrating the legacy of Chuck. My presentation will discuss the importance of Chuck's theory of cooperative action for the analysis of cultural reproduction and transformation more broadly. For a long time, social theorists have been interested in the question of cultural change. What are the factors contributing to the transformation of cultural forms? And conversely, how are certain structures reproduced from one generation to the next? Perhaps the most well-known theoretical framework for theorizing continuity and change is that of Marshall Sahlins, who is remembered mostly for the dictum that in all change there is continuity. Events are ordered by culture, whereas culture is reordered by the historical contingency of events, which is why there's never total reproduction or transformation of cultural order. Those present here may immediately notice that this argument recognizes one of the core principles of cooperative action, namely reuse with transformation of resources provided by predecessors. Reformulating Sahlins with Chuck, we would say that actions are built from or ordered by a cultural substrate and are at the same time, then they provide a substrate for future transformations, the reordering of culture. Following Chuck, I argue here that close attention to the everyday cooperative construction of particular practices provides important resources for the analysis of how continuity as well as transformation are achieved. I will discuss a case from my fieldwork among the indigenous Aceh in Eastern Paraguay, looking at the ways in which particular traditional verbal art practices are appropriated and innovated upon by younger generations. The Aceh used to live as nomadic hunter-gatherers in the subtropical rainforests of what today is Eastern Paraguay, a dwindling territory due to the advancing colonial frontier, persecutions by Paraguayan colonists, and contact-related epidemics forced all subgroups onto reservations in the 1960s and 70s. They now there live in small villages, have abandoned a nomadic lifestyle, and this, of course, brought with it dramatic sociocultural changes. Hunting and gathering were replaced by small-scale
agriculture, and most Ache converted to Protestant Christianity through influence of North American missionaries. Ritual and verbal art practices were also abandoned, and the heritage language Ache was gradually replaced by Guarani, a Paraguayan national language. The life world of the Ache has been radically transformed through the encounter with Paraguayan society. Recent years, however, have also seen renewed interest in traditional cultural practices. Language shift has stalled midway, and with a mixed way of speaking equally composed of Ache and Guarani elements currently emerging as the community norm. The Ache continue to go on regular hunting treks in nearby forest reserves, some of them specifically designed as pedagogical excursions for children. And they have started annual cultural weeks, practicing and showcasing key cultural practices, most importantly, ritual, wailing, and singing. Most recently, such verbal art is showcased also on a community radio show. These kinds of processes of initial abandonment and subsequent reclamation of cultural forms have been widely documented from many parts of the world. A core part of this process is cultural objectification. While Salins has always emphasized continuity in change, he also recognized that at times people actively try to abandon cultural practices. For instance, in response to humiliation, through which people learn to perceive their practices in entirely negative terms. Joel Robbins has emphasized the important role of missionaries and Christian conversion in this process. Again, the theory of cooperative action can help us here. Missionaries are so efficient agents of cultural change because they're experts at highlighting, that is, making perceptually salient certain heretofore taken for granted practices and compelling neophytes to abandon them. But as Salins and many others have already noticed, in the long run, such highlighting and objectification of culture can have a contrary effect to that intended by missionaries, namely to cause a self-conscious revalorization and reclamation of culture. It is this kind of process that happened in the past few decades in the Ache communities, culminating in cultural weeks and the community radio show. The affordances of radio and video can further contribute to such highlighting of culture. The radio was the achievement of a handful of activists who received the equipment in a competition by the Paraguayan Ministry of Communication. La Voz de la Selva, the voice of the jungle, is how they called the radio. It has been installed temporarily in a small room behind a storage house that also served as the guest room where I was staying doing my fieldwork. This gave me the opportunity of doing participant observation of the radio from 5 a.m. in the morning when the first music session woke me from my slumber until darkness when frequent power outages halted transmission. The Ache had high hopes that the radio would provide unity among them and help them in promoting their heritage language and cultural traditions. And indeed, many of the little transistor radios and cell phones in the small Ache village were tuned to the frequency 89.9. Community leaders, school teachers, pastors, and sometimes an invited guest would organize different programs, music, political discussions, religious sermons, and importantly, sessions on language and culture. It were primarily the elders who were invited to these sessions to sing songs and tell stories. These sessions were supposed to run every day from 5 or 6 p.m. till darkness, but due to power outages and technical problems, they were not that regular. But whenever it worked, everybody in the community was tuning in. Here's just one example of a song that you might hear on the radio. I have not provided the transcript, so I want you to focus on the prosody and the voice. The genre in question is called Pre'e, analyzed by Pierre Clastre in his book Society Against the State. When performed by male hunters, the primary function of the Pre'e is to celebrate the feats of the hunt and male prowess. Clastre contrasts it with a female genre called the chinga, a kind of ritual wailing exclusively performed by women. The themes of the female chinga are death, illness, and the violence of the whites. Younger generations display ambivalent stances to these practices. On the one hand, elders are certainly looked up to as bearers of Aceh cultural traditions. Yet at the same time, they're often ridiculed for that very fact, alongside their perceived lack of knowledge in the modern world. Youth and children frequently imitate songs and wailing in mocking fashion. In the remainder of this paper, I will closely look at some of these practices and the kinds of cooperative transformations of culture that they engender. A few children with whom I've been doing my research have followed me into this small little room where the radio equipment into the small room with the radio equipment where I'm writing my field notes and transferring recordings to the computer. It's dark outside and quite late in the evening. The last radio session has ended a few hours ago. The equipment is turned off and the radio host and the elders have left. 6-year-old Pikugi has climbed upon the chair behind the mixing console. Like this, his cousin says, laughter. Together, he leans forward, takes a deep breath, and approaches the microphone. So in these practices, the elder songs have become available as a public substrate upon the children innovate. The structures, melodies, voices, and the content of these songs are appropriated by the children in mocking fashion in order to construct an oppositional stance to their grandparents. In much of her work, Candy Goodwin has analyzed in detail how exaggerated pronunciations and modified repetitions of previous talk are used in girls' peer groups for displaying opposition and disaffiliation. And Jane Hill has shown that mocking practices often operate by invoking multiple indexical chains simultaneously directly indexing desirable qualities of the speaker while indirectly indexing negative stereotypes. However, while these practices are certainly designed to mock elders' practices and display an oppositional stance, the prosodies, voices, and content of the mock performances constitute a new substrate that becomes available anew for further cooperative transformations and can turn into a serious performance by children. This is what I will explore in detail in the remainder of the paper. This sequence, the particular sequence I will analyze was not prompted by a radio session and took place in a context quite different from the radio. As usual, I accompanied a group of Aceh on one of their monthly hunting treks to the forest. To the children, nothing is more exciting than to go on one of these treks. It was on the afternoon of the third day. The hunters were out, women were resting, weaving, or preparing food, and children engaged in play in and around. To a few children, why don't they sing a song so I could film it? Immediately, a group assembles and launches a church. The song goes on for a few minutes. After they are done, the elder says now they should sing in Aceh. Just two girls, already a little older, start humming, and then some boys chime in and begin to improvise a few lines. Inform and fun of the experiences of elders. They've eaten all the palm hearts. Yeah, yeah. They've left me alone in the forest. Then my family died and I'm left all alone. These are how some of these lines go.
Go upama miso go chiripude go upama mie go manoma se familia etacho go tangu pecho O uma gobu e takai mikune. Gobu kore.
The play goes on for a while. The children take turns and encourage one another to participate in the pre'e. Their songs are accompanied by the laughter of their peers who are standing around or swinging with a vine hanging down from one of the trees. This highlights the non-seriousness of the often dramatic events that the children evoke in their improvisation. On the one hand, the children are here using images from the experience of elders to make fun of them. But at the same time, as they are doing that, they're also inhabiting the subject position of an elder who has suffered the pain and violence of the contact period. By appropriating it in a humorous way, they make it their own, simultaneously constructing generational opposition while also reclaiming that subject position for themselves. This becomes especially clear a little later, when after another round of joking pre'e, one of the boys, I'll call him Arturo, chants the line, and then our Lord has died as well, yay. This is in relation to teachings in church. Here we see another intertextual layer added. The voice of the elders is paired with the voice of the pastors of the teachings of the Bible, nowadays also frequently incorporated into their own pre'e by the elders themselves. But it takes an even more dramatic turn instantly. After Arturo's line, and then our Lord died as well, one of the friends whispers to him, "De papaji," which translates as "about your dad." Arturo turns away, looking down. Huh? His friend insists, "Talk about your dad, say my dad died." An older girl then, who has been listening, interrupts. "Todd, he's gonna cry." His friend continues to insist, "Let's go, just say it quick." Arturo makes up his mind, comes forward, and again starts to sing into the camera about the death of his own father. Arturo's father had worked as a ranger in the forest reserve, and while on duty, he was ambushed and killed by white poachers a year earlier. It was a tragic death that reminded of the violence and enmity between Aceh and Paraguayans. Now his 6-year-old son launches a pre'e to mourn his death.
Go to Papa Manoma. Go to the Manoma. Go Anamia, Tinga Petema. But the Tinga Mami to Papa Manuare. Go Manovera Mago, Takramano, Iman Bukanga.
For a moment, the performance acquires serenity and the laughter is suppressed. While Arturo is singing, the others look at him compassionately until he finishes and runs off to swing in the vine. While it might have started as a mocking practice, the frame has now subtly shifted and it has become a proper emotive mourning performance. Mocking can be seen as a kind of mimicry that constructs an opposition as the children ridicule the elders, indicating a turn away from their culture with the goal of abandoning their traditions. But as the pre'e chants unfold, the multimodal performance provides a new context that allows for further innovations, leading to Arturo's song about his father's murder. Here, the pre'e provides a formal structure for an actual lament, an affordance for mourning and the expression of Arturo's grief. It channels his emotive response to the memory of his father. Arturo then here appropriates the song as a cultural tradition where his little voice joins those of his forebears. Mediated by technology and politics, the chant is still grounded in the form of the pre'e as a public substrate to which the Aceh children still have access. It thus provides a vivid example of the cooperative processes that are at the basis of transformation and reproduction of culture, as Chuck Goodwin has shown throughout his career. Thank you.
Hey, everybody, that's the end of our talks. But at this point, I'd really like to invite any questions that people might have for any of our speakers. Yes, please.
Hey, Jan, that was wonderful. I just had maybe a clarification question and then potentially, I probably got this wrong, but did I hear you say that the pre'e was usually associated with men and hunting? And
Yes.
then there were a different form associated with mourning. So then I was curious about, is this a mixing? Is this a new form to have the pre'e be mourning?
Yeah, you're absolutely right in noticing that. I skipped over that. There is a distinction between the pre'e, which is essentially performed by men and women alike, and a female wailing, which is performed only by women. So there's a certain asymmetry. However, the content-wise, even if the women perform the pre'e, it takes upon it is the topics are mourning and death and violence. So it is true that it would never be sung. A mourning song wouldn't be sung by a man traditionally. So in some way he switches, gets the genders mixed up here, the Arturo. But the genre in terms of the pre'e is also mobilized for mourning performances, even though the classic, the prototypical pre'e is the male hunter's prowess, and which was also the topic of the short excerpt that I played.
Thank you.
But thanks for allowing me to clarify that.
I have three questions for different people, but while we're on Jan, so can you talk about the rhetorical structure of the children's songs? And it seems at some point, initially there were response cries in one of the examples. I don't know if that's a habitual way of initiating something. And then also I'm interested in the vowel elongations at the end. And can you talk about, have you tried to plot the melodies that are being sung through these? Because I think that's critical in all this.
Yes. So both on yes on both cards. So in terms of the initiation, the traditional way in which these songs were performed were certainly so if you look at just this particular performance where somebody just comes up with some topic and then the next child chimes in without particular regard of waiting for the other one to finish. That is, in fact, as we have heard report, the way in which they were performed in the forest as well. So that it was sort of a polyphonous chorus of everybody singing for themselves. Cluster has a whole analysis of sort of an anti-communicative function that they're sort of inward oriented, of sort of not really meant for an audience to be heard. There are some issues with that, but sort of this general, what you perceive in this performance as sort of more or less chaotic, that's essentially what they used to be. And the vowel elongation, yes, I have looked. Of course, the pitch is much higher of the children, but I'm really impressed when you look at the prosody, and especially sort of the rising into the sort of the. You notice a rising volume in the chant breaks by the elders. It's really very well imitated by the children, even though you think about it as like just mainly it's like yeah, but it actually replicates that sort of rising volume. Shorter. It's much shorter than of course the multiple repetitions of the yeah. But yeah, it's really remarkable the way in which they are able already at a young age to sort of to reproduce these structures prosodically and yeah.
Okay, I had this. If other participants are there virtually, I wanted Lourdes to talk about assessments, and we saw a child's assessment of his own actions, being able to inhabit the action of someone with a tump line. So if you could talk about assessments in the context of the Mayan children that you looked at. Is Lourdes there?
Hi, can you see me? Yeah.
Yeah, so I was really interested in the fact that you highlighted the idea that the young boy was smiling, so making such a big smile to sort of compliment himself on his activity. So what kind of ways do you see this happening, or what commentary can you make about assessments of a child's ability in this Mayan context, because you notice that no one else said something?
Yeah, well, actually, there's a very little praise and acknowledgement when a child, achieves some kind of goal in this context, the top line, caring. No, it's really very very particular in terms of not having adults sort of leading children's learning, but it's really this initiative and self-motivation to learn. So there's really no positive assessment or praising. This child is smiling because he has been focused and very interested in embodying these actions. So, well, as I noticed, there's nobody around said a word when he was walking with it final at the end. So, we see little praise and any little positive assessment when children are able to do something. Actually, it's expected at certain age that they do. They have developed certain skills without being guided by adults. But here we have the siblings mediating the learning, and we see some assessments from the siblings, some positive assessments.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
I had a question for Terra, which is, are other parts of the body, such as the legs, involved in the tactile communication that you have been documenting?
Yeah, actually, there are several ways that there are many ways that the legs and feet come into communication. One of them is if you're standing up, you can, so there are all of these layers of tactile communication that I didn't discuss at all. And one of them is just co-presence. So there's a general expectation that if you're interacting with people, that you'll stay in contact with them somehow. And the easiest way to do that is with your legs. If you're sitting next to each other, to just put your legs up next to each other. But if you're standing, you can put your foot on top of the other person's foot. And actually, my friend who is a protactile person who has a dog, the dog knows how to do this too. If the dog wants to go out, the dog puts his foot on her foot and just kind of presses down. And then for back channeling, if your hands are tied up for some reason or another, you can shake your legs back and forth, and that counts as back channeling. And then, of course, the legs of the addressee or AKA signer too, they get used as signing space all the time. You saw that actually in one of the videos, was that the tops of the thighs of one of the people was a surface for the production of signs. So those are just a few examples.
I also have a question for Terra. And I'm really interested in the role that you're ascribing to intuition, especially because the concept of intuition has a sort of contested use within linguistics, from the sort of like categorical intuitions of the early days to more gradual intuitions, like different kinds of stars and the ways that people would judge grammaticality. But the other part of intuition that I'm interested in is more like the sort of intuition of what is the sort of classical aesthetics intuition, like what is good and beautiful type of stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that to me interacts really interestingly with the sort of well-formedness of the signs in the other person's hand. not just the intuition of like, is this grammatical, but the intuition of, is it good to behold? And the sort of interaction that I could sort of imagine was what was happening when people were giving Diane Brentari these kind of like ick faces of like, you're not doing this right, or something here is wrong, but it might not be grammatically wrong, just like aesthetically wrong.
Mm-hmm. So I'm trying to kind of walk a thin line with the issue of intuition, but I mean, the main point that I was trying to get across in that talk was that intuitions have histories to them. And so I would be disinclined to think about intuitions the way that a certain kind of linguist thinks about them, as, you know, something that you can attribute to an innate capacity. But that said, I do see an ethnographic reality to intuitions as the object of some other sign. So I'm not saying necessarily that they are intuitions, but whatever Diane is systematically responding to as a phonologist, I see what she's talking about. And then I also see what deafblind people are talking about when they talk about how things can be intuitive or not intuitive. And so I guess I'm trying to say there's probably something to the labeling of something as intuitive. And at the same time, how can you see the sort of histories that lead to those intuitions rather than assuming that they just are, you know, universal to all humans or something like that. So yeah, it's a very problematic concept and I'm just wading right into it. So I don't know if I've done, I just started thinking about that with this talk, but I do think that it speaks to these processes that Chuck was so interested in with cooperative action, that you could actually attribute intuitions to those types of processes.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I look forward to reading more of this work. Thank you to all of our remote panelists. Thank you to our IRL panelists. And I just want to bring the session to a close and thank our tech support for incredible work and patience. Thank you.
And I'll speak on behalf of Chuck. Thank you so much for all this beautiful effort in putting together beautiful presentations that honor Chuck. And he's very, very happy to have seen them. I know that.
We hope to see everybody tomorrow at a different room, I think, but it's at 1 p.m. Mountain time here. So both for remote and in-person presenters.